Everybody ready? Ready?
Yeah.
All right, listen.
It's your weekend show.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
With Bob Biermann.
It's great.
It dawned on me just a couple of days ago that it was 3 years ago this program launched. That's right, 3 years ago. The first program was actually produced and aired on the 7th of March in 2015. And when I started this program, I had an idea and a concept for what the program could and perhaps should be. I envisioned it back then as kind of a radio magazine. The first program had all kinds of sound effects from years gone by. The next week, I talked about an event that occurred in 1970, the first Earth Day that also occurred in, at that time, April of 1970. And I looked back as we were in the month of March, but heading toward the month of April. You know, it's funny. Over these past 3 years, this program has gone through a lot of twists and turns. I try to find that magic ingredient to make the show work for you each and every week. Sometimes I put a lot of effort in and the response coming back is, well, not that great. And sometimes I just come before the microphone and talk to you from the heart. And I'm amazed at the number of emails and responses the program receives in that week. As I thought about what to talk about on this week's program, I look at the news and I'm thinking, do I make, comments about what's going on in this world today? When I look at the state of our society in the Western world, do I continue to comment on those things? And to a degree, yes. But when it comes to things like politics, when it comes to things like, well, the world as we know it now and the changes, there are plenty of voices out there that do a great and incredibly good job in providing you useful and needed information. When I talk from the heart and share from my life experience, it seems those are the programs that I get the most feedback from each and every week. When I do a program where I just let you into my life and I share something from my past and the good and the bad, people seem to react because a lot of folks can identify with some of the things that I have gone through in life. And the truth is, many of us go through similar yet different experiences in our own way. It's part of this gift called life. And so today I could have talked about politics. Today I could talk about current events. Today I could talk about how our highly technical society is becoming increasingly more self-centered and, to be quite honest, not all that well informed, living in their own little silos and bubbles. I could do that. But today I thought carefully. I thought very carefully. What does this program do best? Where does the reaction come from people around the world? And it's when we share the life experience that, well, to be honest, I'm beginning to realize maybe that's the void that this program is designed to fill. To talk about life experience, to talk about memories and things that we recall from a different time in our past. And maybe take the knowledge of what we learned in that life experience and apply it to today and share it with others as they are going through similar points in their journey in life, to be a help and an aid. And so today, I'm going to share a little bit from the heart. I've been thinking about doing this from time to time, and then I chicken out. It's hard to bring back some memories. Sometimes those memories are are so joyful and so wonderful, and other times they can be so painful. You know, we have the ability in our minds to block out those things in our past, and we can forget them. And maybe that's a healthy thing in its own right, but we need to bring them into remembrance from time to time to see how far we have come from the places we have been. I look at my life, maybe you can look at yours right now too. As I've told you, I'll be 64 years of age this year. So I'm not a young guy, but I don't consider myself old No, I'm not old yet. At least I'm trying to tell myself that each and every day. But I look back over the life that I've lived, the good things that have happened to me, the mistakes that I've made, and how good things occurred oftentimes in spite of myself. And that's kind of where I want to begin the program today. I've shared with you a little bit how I got in the radio business. It was kind of a life dream as a youngster of all things. You know, I thought about everything in my youngest years. You know, maybe I'll be a soldier, maybe I'll be a fireman, maybe I'll be an astronaut. I mean, we all go through these processes growing up as we begin to absorb and learn the world around us. We try to find our place in life. And oftentimes, even as we become adults, we're still trying to find our current place in life. There's nothing sadder to me than living a life, than going through life, never accomplishing or getting even close to the things we can do. I think of people that they live their lives vicariously through television programs, through social media, oftentimes pretending to be something or somebody they are not. And that can be sad as well. One of the advantages of the time that I grew up, we had a certain level of mass communication. We had television, we had radio, we had newspapers. So getting information around the globe was actually rather quick and rather fast. Maybe not the 24-hour-a-day news cycle we see today on cable and satellite or the internet, but sufficient enough that we could catch up by the afternoon of all the major events that occurred in the world in the last 12 hours to 24 hours. In other words, we had the technology to keep us informed. In the 1960s, we would watch television at night and see what was going on in the world around us on the news. And then we would find ourselves being entertained by the three major networks with their television programs, maybe variety shows, mysteries, police dramas, comedies. But you know something? One of the things that I truly miss from that period of my life, which we really can't find today, is the wholesomeness and the family-friendly values that came from that television set. You know, when TV first came around in 1948, it had been around prior to that. As a matter of fact, we would have had television probably 4 or 5 years sooner than we did had we not been involved in the Second World War. Even in the 1930s, the first prototype television sets were shown at the New York World's Fair. My father tells me that he saw that and was so intrigued. But television was still another decade or so away before it would become plausible to even have those things in our homes. And there were warnings back then about how this idiot box or boob tube, all kinds of names it was given, could be detrimental. But the truth is, it really wasn't as bad back then because we still had boundaries in what we delivered in terms of content on this new medium. We could safely put the television set on in the evening, and it didn't matter if your children were 18 or 8 or 4. You didn't worry about what came over the TV set into your home. Today you do. Today we have all kinds of content providers, far beyond the three networks that we once knew growing up, like ABC, NBC, and CBS in the United States, and the CBC or the BBC and other outlets around the Western world. It has definitely changed quite a bit. Now it's nothing with satellite. Now it's nothing with cable or on demand or Netflix or the equivalent thereof to bring material into our homes, onto our TV sets, and into our living rooms and into our dens and even our bedrooms, where the language is filthy, where the plot is narcissistic. And this is what we expose ourselves to in this day and age. Well, enough of being on the soapbox. I think a lot of you that are listening can identify with what I'm trying to say. And today I want to just share some memories of my life and how we end up from point A to point B. And sometimes there are a lot of additional points and little changes along the way. On many of these programs, I have shared with you this profound thought that occurred to me one day, and it's not all that profound, that some little thing that occurs in your life can alter the direction of your life in the most profound and incredible ways you can ever imagine. Deciding to visit someplace one day, or the family being moved to a different city, or the choice you make on where to go to school, the people you associate with, the jobs that you decide to take or decline over a lifetime. How they can alter your life path completely. I was thinking the other day, this is probably 46 years ago, over 46 years ago now, that I found myself with a paying job at a radio station. And I loved radio even as a kid. Yeah, I watched TV, but I even listened to radio probably more than I watched television growing up. As many of you know, I was born outside of the city of, I was actually born in the city of New York, in Brooklyn. And by the age of just over 1, I was placed for adoption into a home out in Long Island, about 35 miles east of the city of New York. And that's where I spent my, first memories of a child, and then kindergarten and elementary school, primarily in a handful of communities. Manhasset and Port Washington, where my grandparents lived and where I first lived in Manhasset. And then we lived in a town called Hicksville in the middle of Long Island. Well, actually, not really the middle, but it was considered the middle where the population was back in the 50s and the 60s. A lot of the World War II veterans that returned after the war settled in places like Long Island rather than living inside the city of New York or into Brooklyn or Queens. And they kept moving away from the city to achieve a better life for their families, a more wholesome life with a backyard and a sidewalk and neighbors that you knew by first name. You knew who your neighbors were. You knew who your friends were. And that was the environment I grew up in during that time. But was it always a perfect time? No, we had the fear. Remember, we did have the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, and I was very young, but I remember it well. I remember how many parents were so concerned of what could happen with those missiles in Cuba. Would this be World War III, less than 20 years after the end of World War II? And there was a great fear. I remember people building bomb shelters at their homes just in case there was an attack on a place like New York City. Would we be able to survive out there for a while in our suburban homes in Long Island or Connecticut, New Jersey? We had the duck and cover drills. We had those civil defense signs letting you know where the fallout shelters could be found when you were in a downtown area. I remember those days. We forget that part of our growing up. We remember riding our bicycles. We remember the sunny days. We remember going to a Jones Beach or whatever the case may be, or Freedom Land. That was a little amusement park not far from where I grew up. I can remember going there as a kid and riding these small little roller coasters and what have you. We remember those good memories, and oftentimes we kind of put in the back of our mind and try to forget some of the more difficult things we went through. Did I like going to school? About as good as any other kid did. But I did it and got through it and survived it. Yeah, life was different back then in those years, and I'm sure a lot of you listening to me today, because a lot of you people that listen to the program are kind of in my age bracket, and maybe I'm about to bring to you some memories about life. You know, it's the people we sometimes meet who are willing to invest a part of themselves, if not all of themselves, into us. That is one of the most incredible dynamics of being a human being. Now, I'm going to sound like some old codger when I say this. I don't think our young people today have the understanding, and I'm not being mean-spirited, I'm not trying to be critical in a way I shouldn't, but I really believe that many of our young people today do not have the basic skill sets, understanding, and the expansion of their heart and their soul to truly and fully understand the depth of real friendship, true relationships, and dare I say what it really means to fall in love. That's part of the human experience for most of us, falling in love. I know as a kid, and I'm talking when I'm 9, 10, 11, maybe getting toward 13, did I have crush on little other girls? You bet I did, like most guys would. But I didn't know what to do with those feelings. I was raised in a time of being a gentleman, and so you want to do the right thing, and there is this natural interest in the opposite sex, obviously. That's how we are wired. That's how we are made. That's how we are born. Everybody in this world has this need to be loved. The problem is a lot of people do not even understand what love is. And we'll get into that in just a little bit on the radio program today. I'm thinking back at a time. We're entering the 1970s. And I have been raised, as I said, listening to radio in cities like New York, so I was exposed to a number of the legendary radio stations, and I never thought that I could ever be amongst those on the radio. I mean, I'm just a kid living in Long Island with a dream, and I never thought that I would have the voice for radio. I just didn't see it. Of course, at that age, my voice was a wee bit higher, too. I was a boy soprano as a kid, so I didn't have that great bombastic radio voice that I would hear coming out of my little bedside radio growing up. But once again, do I use the word fate? Do I use the word intervention? Do I use the word chance? Do I, whatever the word is. Our family ended up in a smaller community in upstate New York by the time I was getting ready to enter high school. And this was a town of about 9,000 people in a county of not that many more. It was not a very big area. Farming was one of the biggest industries. The Jackson and Perkins Rose Gardens, if you've ever heard of those roses, their international headquarters at that time was in the little community of Newark, New York, 13 miles south of Lake Ontario, about 30-some-odd miles east of Rochester, about 45 miles west of Syracuse. just north of the Finger Lakes. In this winter wonderland, as I look back now, is where I spent my high school years. And that's where my voice began to change. And my interest in radio was still there, because you remember, maybe some of you are old enough to remember, listening to your AM radio at night, and how magically, after the sun went down, suddenly radio stations from far away appeared on your radio. I could hear every evening those big radio stations, a number of them coming out of New York City. But I also heard radio stations coming from Chicago, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Detroit, Michigan, and a number of other cities. And I was exposed to all these radio stations from all over. And my interest was really beginning to peak. And, I would love to be a radio announcer. The same thing that I wanted to do as a kid. But how am I ever going to, this now teenager living in a small town in upstate New York, how am I ever going to break in to being a radio star? I can think of the names that, like the Dan Ingrams, the Larry Lujaks, the Cousin Bruceys, and all those that, and probably dozens more whose names are just escaping me at the moment, that I listen to. How can it be that I will ever be one of them? Well, I had a bright idea. And I'm sure the statute of limitations has long run out on this. It has been, getting close to 50 years now. When I was about 14, maybe going on 15, almost right at my 15th birthday. A couple of my friends and I, we were I don't want to say we were the outcasts. We were just a little different. We weren't football players. We didn't play baseball. We're not on the wrestling team. I was in the chorus, one of my friends in the band. But we all had these hobbies and interests. A lot of us liked electronics, which I did. And one day, we were talking about what we could do to have a hobby in common. Like I say, we didn't play athletics, wasn't into board games. We were into creating things, not just playing with things. And there's a big difference. And I think we've lost some of that in our youth today. We pacify instead of use those gifts to expand who we are. And out of nowhere, I had this bright idea. I wonder if we could build a radio station. And we all looked at each other and thought it was kind of a funny idea. And it would be fun if it could be done. But how do you do it? How do you build a radio station? We're 15. What do we know? Well, we discovered a thing called the library. I had been getting the magazine Popular Electronics for, at that point, probably 4 years, since I was very young. And I had built a number of, electronic kits. And I had dissected a number of guitar amplifiers and put them back together again. I'd done a lot of that kind of stuff. I'd learned a lot about electronics and the components. And I'd seen the inside of a local radio station, so I had a good idea of what made the magic work. There's a guy sitting there. He's got some turntables to play records. He's got tape machines to play commercials. It can't be that complicated to do this, was my thinking at the time. So why not? And so over the next year, we kind of worked toward this goal of building our own little radio station. One of my friends, they had a large basement, and my father and his father helped build a room for us, probably about, 10 by 10, well insulated, with electricity in it. And we had a table built onto the wall so we could start constructing our radio station. It took almost a year to do it. And we had our microphones, and we had our turntables. We had not one, but 2 reel-to-reel tape recorders in that studio. And we had 3 microphones. The mixer, we built that ourselves over the course of a year. A lot of trial and error before it was complete, and it worked. And our first transmitter we bought from Lafayette Electronics. It was a little phono oscillator. 2 little tubes. And with its little 10-foot antenna, it reached out about 300 feet. That was it. And yeah, we played games with it to see if we could massage it a little farther down the highway. And we got it to maybe 1,000 feet. In other words, we're serving about 5 or 6 homes in a subdivision. And then I had the bright idea about the newly discovered, even though it had been around for a while, the idea of doing it on FM. I mean, nobody much cared about FM. I really worried about doing things on AM because that might catch the attention of the local AM radio station and, of course, the authorities like the Federal Communications Commission. But nobody cared much at that time about FM. And we found the diagram of how to build this little FM transmitter. And over time, we played with it, and before we knew it, we were getting out about 2 or 3 miles, not hundreds of feet, with our little basement radio station. And we ran it live every day in the afternoon from 3 in the afternoon until 11 o'clock at night. We eventually had a reel-to-reel tape recorder with auto reverse. Maybe you know what that is. If you don't, it doesn't make any difference. It just meant it was playing music while we were in school. We ran that little radio station for a couple of years. And I knew as we got into our second year of doing this, as I was a junior in high school, in the second half of my junior year, that this is really what I wanted to do for a living. I enjoyed it. I had a lot of friends in high school that listened to our little FM radio station, amazingly so. And I remember, and this is one of the things I've wanted to share, and I've just debated, do I want to share this part of my life or not? But I think today I should. And I want to bring back some memories from 1970, 71, and 72 that propelled me into this radio business. And how this little radio station run by some high school kids became a vehicle to a real career. Hard to believe at times, but it's true. I have fond memories of those days and how it gave me my start. You know, I'm going to share one other thing, and this will kind of bring me into our little break point here in the program. By the way, if you are just tuning in, this is your weekend show. I've been talking a long time today. This is your weekend show, and I'm your host, Bob Biermann, and I'm so glad that you're with us. And you can find out more about the radio show at our website, yourweekendshow.com. That's yourweekendshow.com. Maybe you'll even send me an email this week. Just Bob at yourweekendshow.com. Also on Facebook, just search for Your Weekend Show. Now, as I was saying, this little basement radio station, and one of my friends who lives actually in Michigan, I know he has some recordings and some pictures, and if I can ever get a hold of a couple of those, I'm going to post them on the website or on Facebook. Hard to believe what 50 years can do to a person, but it's part of my life and where I came from. And I don't think that this hour's program this week will cover every bit of this. It'll probably have to extend into next weekend. But it's something we're missing today. Having hobbies in our formative years that gives us the creative impetus to discover our talents and our true calling in life. I never thought when I was in high school I would ever get a real job in radio. I thought this hobby would be the end of it, and then I'd finish high school and I'd go on to some college, and who knows what I'd do for a living. I had no clue what I would do, but I knew that I loved this, being able to communicate and talk and play music and share on radio. And I'm going to share a little bit more about that experience in just a few minutes. but I want to set the scene with one of the songs we played at that time.
You and I must make a pact. We must bring salvation back. Where there is love, I'll be there. I'll be there. I'll reach out my hand to you. I'll have faith in all you do. Just call my name and I'll be there.
And I'll be there to comfort you, build my world of dreams around you. I'm so glad that I found you. I'll be there with the love that's strong. I'll be your strength. I'll keep holding on. Yes, I will. Yes, I will.
Let me fill your heart with joy and laughter. Togetherness, girl, is all I'm after. Whenever you need me, I'll be there. I'll be there to protect you
Yeah, baby.
with an unselfish love that respects you. Just call my name and I'll be there.
And I'll be there to comfort you, build my world of dreams around you. I'm so glad that I found you. I'll be there with the love that's strong. I'll be your strength. I'll keep holding on. Ooh, yes I will. Yes I will.
If you should ever find someone new, I know he better be good to you. 'Cause if he doesn't, I'll be there. Don't you know, baby, yeah, yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there. Just call my name. I'll be there. Just look over your shoulders, honey. Ooh, I'll be there. I'll be there. Whenever you need me, I'll be there. Don't you know, baby, yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there. Just call my name. I'll be there.
Michael Jackson from way back in 1970 here on your weekend show. I'm your host, Bob Biermann. If you're just tuning in, we're kind of sharing some memories from way back when. I've been kind of sharing what got me into this radio business, the influences on my life, and the things that were going on during this very formative period of my life. If you're new to your weekend show and are just tuning in, by the way, we do have a website, yourweekendshow.com. That is yourweekendshow.com. And you can find us on Facebook. Look for us. Just make the word Your Weekend Show one word in a search on Facebook, and you will find us right away. And I hope maybe you'll visit our pages this weekend or sometime this coming week, and maybe drop me a line to let me know you listen and maybe some thoughts about the program. I'm sharing a little bit of what got me in the radio business when I was in high school. what really drove me. Like I told you before, if you were listening in the first part of the program, I was raised in the shadow as a young child near New York City and Long Island. And so I listened to all the legendary radio stations like WHN, WABC, WMCA, WNEW, just rattling off some call letters that come to mind. And then I find myself, because our family moved way into upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region, not far from Lake Ontario, in a small town that had a radio station, believe it or not, including the one that I built in high school. As I said, it was not a licensed radio station, and I'm pretty certain that the statute of limitations is long over for something from 45 plus years ago. But it was something we did in high school that really taught us a lot. And that's one of the things I think a lot of our youth miss today. Some do have hobbies, some are creative, but not at the level we had when I was growing up. Hobbies that could springboard you into interest in life to a career. And my friends, I can remember their names very well. I can't believe that we accomplished something at a young age and pulled it off and could actually be heard over the majority of our little community in upstate New York on the FM dial. But it propelled the interest in broadcast. A couple of us stayed with radio afterward. Another one went into engineering in a different line of electrical engineering because of starting with this little radio station. It was a hobby that opened our horizons to a different world around us. And how do we plug ourselves into this world when our time comes, when we finish high school and go on to either a technical school or a college? In some cases, maybe right to a career. It's a different world today than it was then. I think there were more opportunities and more chances than we have today. But I look back in my childhood and my high school years in particular, and they were good years as I look back now. Of course, we tend to forget some of the more difficult things about life. It's the human nature. The things that went right, the things that went wrong. My home life was not bad, though there were strains and issues, and I think some of you can identify with that as you're listening to what I'm saying, and listen to me carefully. I was raised in a home we didn't lack for anything. We had all the necessities of life. We had a roof over our heads, great food on the table at dinner time. Yeah, there was a dinner time around 6 o'clock every evening. There was a time that we gathered around the table to share what had occurred during the day. It was a different life. My parents, my dad in particular, is a very pragmatic person, and I tend to be very much like him in my outlook on life. I'm a bit of a realist, though I'm a dreamer at the same time, tempering dreams with reality, but that doesn't mean the dreams are not to be pursued. There's the difference. Some people have dreams, but they become so pragmatic they're afraid to even try. If you don't try to do something, you'll never know if you can't or cannot. It was Edison who invented the light bulb, and I don't know how many thousands of components he tried to use for the filament to make the light glow that failed. But as he said years later, I can give you a list of what does not work. And so he considered the effort a success because you could rule out the things that would not work. And ultimately, when he found the right ingredients, the light bulb became a reality and changed the way we lived at that time, all the way to this day. We take lighting in our homes for granted. We've come a long way with our technology. We've come a long way with our technology just in the time that I first started tinkering with electronic stuff as a kid. To build a little radio station, I look at it now because I have an engineering background and I built radio stations later in life and high-powered broadcast equipment. And I look back at what we did then as so simple and so easy But for somebody in the age of 15, 16, and 17, it was quite a challenge. We didn't have some of the tools and resources we have today. We worked with what we had, and guess what? We didn't have the internet to go to Google to find out how to make something. We had to get books, study, and do a lot of trial and error. And I think the best way to learn in life is trial and error, just like with Edison and the light bulb. A lot of trial and error, a lot of perseverance to see a project through from beginning to end. In the early days when we first started building that little radio station in that basement, there were times we got discouraged because things didn't work. They didn't sound right, or this part wouldn't do what we thought it could do. And then we couldn't get it on the radio. We couldn't be heard more than, a few dozen feet. You get discouraged. But we kept persevering. My mother was the one that always thought the hobby was silly and saw no merit in it. My father, on the other hand, was just the opposite. He encouraged me to keep pursuing my dream, and maybe the worst that could happen is I will learn in life what doesn't work for me and find something else. Or maybe this is what I should be doing. Well, those 2 years really did teach me a lot. But not just about radio, but about life in general. Because that's the time in life when you become more independent and you start doing more things for yourself and being less dependent upon your parents, and you begin to find your own place in life. I remember it was probably the fall of 1970. Just as I was entering my junior year of high school. The radio station is now running on FM. We have a nice little audience out there. But I was also very actively involved in our church. I was a member of Redeemer Lutheran Church, a little Lutheran church in Newark, New York. And I was also, besides my radio hobby, I was involved with the youth group. And it was right before the beginning of school, a little before around Labor Day. We had a gathering at our home for prospective new young people to join that youth group. And there was this family that had moved to our community of Newark, New York, that had become members over the summer of that church, and they had a daughter that was going to be interested in becoming a member of the church youth group. They had not been in that town for that long, and I had never met her before. I think I had seen her once toward the end of the school year. And there she was at my house with other youth from our youth group and a couple of new people to get to know each other over just an afternoon of playing records, the things we did back around 1970. And I share this carefully. I look back with fond memories of some of those years. And there was this very, very quiet young gal, kind of like the wallflower, just observing. And very shy, and nobody was speaking to her. And something inside of me, I was very shy myself, especially when it came. It's one thing to be behind a microphone and talk. It's another thing to talk and look at somebody in the eyes and have a conversation, especially when you are not really, you have a little bit of insecurity about yourself. Am I good enough looking? Will some girl find me attractive? Am I good enough? I always had that problem in my life of always wondering if I was good enough for the things that I've tried to do. And I will tell you, even at age 63, I still tend to be that way. I still can be rather shy on certain levels. But it's a part of who I am. And as much as I try to change some of that, it's not easy. But getting back to this young gal that I met her there at our house. And just liked her for some reason. There was this instant attraction to this individual. I never experienced this before in my life. I'm 16, heading towards 17, and I'm meeting this young girl who is just about to turn 16 herself, and I was fascinated. She had a very sweet and kind voice, manners that you just don't find anymore, well-dressed and so polite. And I asked her where she lived, and it turned out, here's the irony, she lived right across the street from my friend where we had built the radio station in the basement. And I told her about it. And she said she would listen. She actually had an FM radio in her bedroom, and she would discover it and see if she could find it. Of course she could. She lived right across the street. About a week or so later, when school started, I saw her in school, and she said, I listened to your radio station. She said, it's kind of neat. I'd love to see it one day. And so one afternoon after school, we came home, and we went first to my friend's house where the radio station was, because every afternoon from 3 until 5, I played the records, and I was your disc jockey during those 2 hours every weekday afternoon, and also on Saturday morning from 9 till noon. That's what I did back in those days. That was my hobby. And I remember the day that she came by, and she sat there in that studio and watched me play records and turn the microphone on and off and play the little tapes and all the things we did to run a radio station. And she was fascinated. And she was so quiet, afraid the microphone might be on. And I told her, no, it's not. And I said, what can I do? She said, would you play a song for me? I said, sure. And so I asked her what she wanted to hear. We had the record, of course, and I got it ready to go on the turntable. And I said, you want to listen in the headphones? And I gave her a pair of headphones. We had 2 sets of headphones, one for a guest announcer, and she put the headphones on as I dedicated to this young person that I really wanted to get to know better this particular song that she requested, but she wanted to dedicate it to me.
Why do birds suddenly appear every time you are near? Just like me, they long to be close to you. Why do stars fall down from the sky every time you walk by? Just like me, they long to be close to you. On the day that you were born, the angels got together and decided to create a dream come true. So they sprinkled moon dust in your hair and golden starlight in your eyes of blue. That is why all the girls in town follow you all around. Just like me, they long to be close to you. On the day
you.
As I look back at it now, I think that day in the autumn of 1970 was the beginning of one of the most profound changes in my life. Like I say, for the past not quite a year, my friends and I had endeavored to build this little, well, for lack of a better word, pirate radio station in a basement in a small town in upstate New York. It was a hobby. It was fun. But that day that I had what now was to become my new girlfriend visiting with us at that radio station and me playing that song for her, I didn't know it at the time. I really didn't. But it was a major change and a major turning point in who I am then, later, and even to this day. Like I've said before, sometimes these unexpected little events in life can change and alter your path forever. And that one did. I'll share a little bit about that. We started dating. We'd see each other every day going to school. I'd see her in church every Sunday. We'd spend our Saturdays together just walking around the town. Didn't matter if it was raining or sunny or snowing or whatever. We became very much inseparable individuals. It made profound changes in me very suddenly. I became aware of what it means to be truly loved by somebody outside of your family. Now, I dated before a few times. I had been bowling. I'd done all the things you do when you are 16 going on 17. And now I had this very unique individual who had a very different perspective to life, more in line with my perspective of life. There are a lot of things we did not know then. I didn't learn till decades later about those years that we were together and how much it changed both of us to become the people we are today. It's amazing the people that walk into our lives unexpectedly, like she did. And me for her, the same thing. It changed us profoundly. She was a straight A student. She was a master at being a musician. I love music. And she was very good in playing various instruments. She loved music like I did. She knew the lyrics to all the songs. She collected records, the same things that I did. One of my hobbies. She loved listening to the radio because that's where she found companionship, and that's where she found the learning of how to get along with other people, oftentimes in the lyrics of a song. And I'm the first person that ever walked into her life that thought like she did. We shared a lot about each other during that time. And it did change me. I mean, I became very conscious about, I've got to always be well showered and cleaned and always presentable. I always had to be the gentleman. It brought out a really good side of me. It helped me to grow into the man that I am today on so many levels. Sometimes these people that come into our lives, they are profound in the change that they can make on us. And we do it willingly, not because we have to, but it's something we so much desire to do. And for the next year, we enjoyed our time together. We enjoyed Oh, even those afternoons at the radio station, she became a regular. She'd bring her homework and she'd work on reading some things as I would play some of those records, and she would help select the music. Those are some really good memories of a time that changed the course of my life forever, and I don't regret them for one moment. There's a couple of other songs that we shared at that time and I played on that little radio station that are a part of my life to this day. I'm going to get to one in just a moment. If you're just tuning in, this is your weekend show, and I'm your host, Bob Biermann. We're talking about life and some memories. And I know we're going to run out of time today before the hour is out. We're going to have to continue this story because there's a lot more to it, a lot more to this story that I think you're going to find fascinating, and I hope that you'll be with us next weekend to hear that program either on the air or online. I think it'll have a profound change to you. Don't forget our website, yourweekendshow.com, or find us on Facebook at Your Weekend Show. But those years, as I was in my junior and senior year of high school, were life-changing on so many levels, and I think too many of our young people today are missing out as they live in a virtual world that is unreal, and they miss experience at all that life has to offer.
Baby, I'ma want you. Baby, I'ma need you. You're the only one I care enough to hurt about. Maybe I'm a crazy, but I just can't live without your loving and affection, giving me direction, like a guiding light to help me through my darkest hour. Lately I'm a praying that you'll always be a staying beside me. Used to be my life was just emotions passing by, feeling all the while I never really knowing why. Lately I'm a praying that you'll always be a staying beside me. Used to be my life was just emotions passing by. Then you came along and made me laugh and made me cry. You taught me why. Baby, I'ma want you. Baby, I'ma need you. Oh, it took so long to find you, baby, baby, I'ma want you. Baby, I'ma need you.
You know, the story I'm trying to share with you today is not going to fit in this hour. There's no doubt it's not going to fit. We're going to have to extend this into at least next weekend, maybe even the weekend after. There's so much I want to share from that part of my life and how it built into the next part and the part after that, and all the experiences that life gives you to take you from point A to point B, and where we can look back and see a life well lived. This is Your Weekend Show, and I'm your host, Bob Biermann. Don't forget the website, yourweekendshow.com. Go there and maybe send me an email or Facebook. Look for Your Weekend Show. We have a lot more to cover next week, and I hope you will join me then right here on Your Weekend Show. Until next weekend, may God richly bless you.
It's Your Weekend Show with Bob Biermann.